Alright, so the last thing that we have to style is this flash message box, which displays a flash message which pops up when something happens. To make it easier to style it, we will be rendering it always. So comment out those two lines. This is how you comment out. You can also use the shortcut key, and maybe I will also copy this element and comment out this line so that we can always display some kind of flash message. This is a flash message. So it looks like this currently, and then we'll begin styling it. So let's add the class attribute. The first thing I'd like you to do is some distinct margin bottom. So it's clearly visible that something important has happened and there is a clear separation. Obviously, later on, this will be rendered conditionally. We just temporarily always render it so we can see all the changes that we are applying. Now, I want this element to be rounded. I want it to have a border, and the border needs to be green, as this is just a success message, with light shade of green, 400. Then it should also have a green background, a very light one, so just 100. Then the horizontal padding of size 4 and vertical padding of size 3. Alright, let's see how this looks like so far. That's how it looks like. Now let's make text a little larger, and also text should be green. The shade is 700. This is our flash temporary message. Alright. So now let's add something inside. So let's add a strong element saying that something was successful. And since all elements are reset by Tailwind, we need to give it a font bold class. This is how it looks like. Now let's wrap the message inside a div element. So it looks like this. So it always says that something was successful, and then we display the message. Alright, so we are more or less done with the styling of this flash message, but I would also like to add some interactivity to this page. So far, everything that we have here is rendered on the server, which means that Laravel returns the whole HTML page. And then to make any kind of interactivity, we just need to follow links. So there is no JavaScript on our page. We can't really do anything that will modify the page that is already downloaded from the server. So to make a tiny example of how you can quickly add some interactivity, we'll add a close button so you can make this message disappear. For that, we'll use a tiny library called Alpine.js. It's actually pretty popular in Laravel world, and it's used together with tools like Livewire, which is just a way to avoid using front-end frameworks like React and Vue and still making your pages, your Laravel pages, dynamic and interactive. So Alpine is extremely easy to use, and we will see that very soon in an example. So let's go ahead and add a close button here that will make this message disappear with the help of Alpine. Alright, so let's jump into the code. This is our container div element. one more thing we can do about this element is to help with accessibility. Let's add a role attribute and say alert. Well, that won't do anything for you guys that don't have any problems with vision, but for everyone else, this is really helping the screen readers and tools like that recognize that this contains some important information, like an alert, something that has happened, and those screen readers and accessibility tools can inform that person that's using the website that something has happened. You should always think about those things. Now, we would like to make this element relative, so I am adding a relative class. All right, so we are adding this relative class because inside we will be adding another class that would be positioned absolute. So it will have a position absolute. So the thing about elements that are positioned using the absolute way is when you specify their position, it would be the position that's relative to either the page or the outermost element that has the relative class. That's why we are adding this relative class here, because we want this element that we are gonna add positioned relatively. Now the code is on the GitHub. I will give you the link on the screen, and also it is attached to this lecture if you are watching on Udemy, and I would like you to paste it now. So I won't be typing that because basically this is an SVG element which basically renders a sign that looks like this. So no point in typing that. You never type SVGs. This is just a description of a vector graphic element. So you can see it is rendered here at the bottom, and I would like it to be rendered here when I move the mouse on the right corner, top right corner of this element. So let's see how can we achieve that. So we've made this top element relative so that we can make this element with the position absolute. Then I will specify the top position to be 0 and bottom position to be 0, but also I will add some padding that's horizontal and some padding that is vertical. Now let's see where it is displayed. So it is displayed here currently. This means we haven't added something. I think, yes, we need to set right to 0. So we need to add this class so it starts being positioned from the right side. So when I refresh, it's now here. I needed a moment to figure out what I have forgotten. So, you know, it always or sometimes happens to me that things don't work as expected. So there we have it. It's on the right. Now let me remove this relative class from the parent element so you can see why it had to be added. So if this container element wouldn't be relative, then this element would be positioned absolute relative to the page. You can see it on the top right corner of the page. So it's either the first top outermost element that's relative, or then if there's no relative elements, then the page, the absolute element is positioned relatively to the page. That's why we had to add that. All right, so we have our button. It's here, but you know, nothing's happening so far. If I click on it, nothing's happening. So first, we should be adding Alpine. So let's copy this line. So we are also getting it from CDN, which I've previously explained what that is. All right, let's refresh. Let's make sure that Alpine is fetched. Alright, so having Alpine running, let's add the first thing. So Alpine has those custom attributes like the X data. Now Alpine will then process those, and this can, this lets us add some interesting features. For example, the X data defines a new Alpine component, and inside it we'll add curly braces and define that flash equals true. So this sets an initial value of the flash variable, and this will control whether our flash message should be visible or not. This is basically a variable that exists in the Alpine context between those div elements. So Alpine takes care of everything, so you don't need to worry about JavaScript variables or anything else. Let's just think of it like that's a variable that Alpine is processing. It knows that it is initially true, and it only is available in the context of this div block. All right. So the next thing that we can do is we can add another directive called xShow to this div element, and this div element should be shown when our variable has the value of true. So it depends on this flash variable, which we know by default is true. So this shouldn't change anything initially. Let's see if everything works as expected. So nothing changes here. So those here are called directives, and they only work if you have Alpine running. So that's not part of HTML. This is a thing that is being processed by this Alpine library that we are using. Alright, now the cool part. So if we have our span element and our SVG element, we can add another thing. This would be a click handler. So we will be adding an event listener that will listen to a click event on this SVG element, our close button. And when it will be clicked, everything inside this attribute will run. So we know that we have this flash variable inside the context of this component. We can set it to false. So this actually is JavaScript. And let's see what's happening. Refresh this page, click on this SVG, and the element disappears. So that was super simple. We just set the flash variable, which exists in the context of this div element. This inside div is shown if the flash is true. It's always true by default. And we add an event handler that basically sets it to false. Not sure I have it here. Why I have it here? Shouldn't be here. Anyway, yeah. If you add that here, this sets the flash variable to false, which makes this div element disappear. All right, so at this point, we should uncomment this and replace this message with the actual flash message. And also we need to uncomment that line and that line, because this only needs to be rendered if there is any flash message. So by default there is none, but I can go ahead and add a task, and then the flash message is displayed, and if I don't want to navigate to other page, I can just close it. Alright, so you can read more about Alpine. I'll give you a link. It's really easy to learn, and there is not really a lot to learn about that. It has some of those so-called directives, which really makes it very easy to add some of the interactivity to your web pages without having to use the so-called vanilla JavaScript and the plain DOM, which is typically pretty hard to do, and Alpine makes it much easier.